Square-Enix has seemingly picked up a reputation for its Final Fantasy games as being money hungry and caring more about a profit margin with rushed development times over delivering a quality game. But is this actually true? It's hard to argue that the games being brought out under the flagship title of Final Fantasy have been a bit lackluster since the early 2000s. Some people may like 15, 13 or Vanilla 12 as they have their own charm to them, but it's quite evident that these games were not as polished as either the company or fans would have hoped. The evidence lies in the changes made to the remastered version of 12 The Zodiac Age, the rest of the 13 trilogy, in particular 13-2 being touted as the true combat model of 13, and 15's rushed story plots, external media, and DLCs to complete the game's story. But do all of these problems result in a shortened, greedy development time, or are there other factors not being taken into account? Let's have a look at each game. Final Fantasy XII had some development issues in that its lead director had to step down for mental health reasons. This meant that the game had two directors with differing visions for the game, working at different stages of the development. This, as well as hardware limitations, meant that some intended content had to be cut. Although, in its defense, most of the criticism from fans came from the radical change in gameplay as opposed to any shortcomings the game may have had. Final Fantasy XIII was one of the most ambitious titles for its time. Being a part of the Fabula Nova Crystallis series, a series of 3 separate titles sharing the same ethos, had major development issues. The series of games, as well as other titles, were to use a new game engine developed by Square-Enix called Crystal Tools. This new engine was being developed alongside Final Fantasy XIII and caused major problems for not only the game's development, but the other titles as well, ultimately not being able to use the engine. Because the engine was being developed alongside the main title, it was too strongly catered for the game's mechanics. Also, because of Final Fantasy's reputation for delivering on cutting-edge graphics, the engine produced never-before-seen detail in character and environment models. This also meant that the game crashed a lot whilst testing, and needed to be dialed back so that the hardware of both the PS3 and Xbox 360 could properly run the game. The problems of making an engine, whilst using it to make a game, caused further delays as resources were pulled from the game's development and into the engine's development team. This led to a staggering 6-year development time. Upon its release, FF13 did feel relatively polished and absolutely stunning to look at, but its pitfalls with environment design were obvious to see. Its narrow corridors and lack of exploration led to a fractious fan reception, and although the game opened up later, by the time that the player was coddled there, the damage had been done. Final Fantasy XV is probably the most extreme case when talking about development issues. Originally one of the 3 titles under the Fabula Nova Crystallis series, it was touted as being the most ambitious title that Square-Enix would ever attempt. As mentioned before, however, the game engine that was used for Final Fantasy XIII Versus was Crystal Tools, which caused delays in development. Crystal Tools made things worse as it was being designed for Final Fantasy XIII, which put limitations on how it could be used for Versus. This eventually meant that the delays would lead it to being moved to the next generation of consoles and a rebranding to Final Fantasy XV. However, Square-Enix did not learn from its mistakes, and began making a new game engine alongside the development of Final Fantasy XV. This caused more development problems, but at least the game engine was being designed with the game in mind, although that would create problems with other games. These constant delays with the new title meant that decisions had to be made. Delay it again, release an unfinished product, or cut some of the content and released a polished game. What they decided was a mix between all 3 choices. They delayed the game a further month or 2 to polish up parts of the combat. They needed to constantly update the game after release, fixing bugs and updating the combat, and they cut content from the game and made it into an external movie, an anime series, and several DLC, some of which has been cancelled. The game's development from start to finish has been plagued with problems, and has produced a mess of a game, including post-release. Through seeing the problems with the most recent Final Fantasy titles, we can see a general pattern of behaviour with regards to the issues of the games. Final Fantasy XII's problems were largely fixed in the recently released remastered version of the Zodiac Age. Final Fantasy XIII was much better with each release in its series, and FF15 was slightly fixed through its various patches post-release, although still has many underlying problems. Coming back to the original question though, does this make the company's motives more money-centric as opposed to delivering a quality product? Well, to be quite frank, I think that these games have been a summation of both of these goals. The long development times would suggest that the company would prefer to push out a quality game and is prepared to wait to do so, but does also have limits as to how long they wait and how much it costs. The development of new engines to provide a better gameplay experience also seems like a company willing to spend money in order to make money, as opposed to one that just wants a quick buck, even if this method was deemed a failure. The positive from these mishaps though is that Square-Enix is learning from its mistakes, however long it's taken them. Two other major titles intended to use the Luminous engine of Final Fantasy XV were promptly moved to the well-developed Unreal 4 engine in Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, which has seen their developments become much smoother since doing so. Should these two games come out relatively bug-free and with all of its intended content intact, then it should bode well for the next numbered title of the Final Fantasy franchise. I suppose we can only wait and hope. Do you agree with my views on Square-Enix with regards to how it's handled the Final Fantasy franchise? Or do you think they are becoming a soulless company like EA? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do leave a big thumbs up, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell to receive notification when new content comes out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!